The massive doors of the Zalani Federation Council chamber slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a funeral bell. Inside, the most powerful beings in 3-star systems sat in stunned silence as Ambassador Kexera stood at the center podium, his blue skin pale with terror. "The outer rim is gone," he said, his voice cracking. "Every single colony in the Vega sector has been wiped out. Not conquered. Not occupied. Completely consumed." Elder Mordan, the oldest member of the council, felt his tentacles shake as he stared at the holographic display showing empty space where thriving worlds once existed. The numbers on his screen made his stomach turn. 12 billion souls. Gone in just 3 weeks. "How?" whispered Counselor Dexani from the back row. "Our defensive fleets were the pride of the Federation. State-of-the-art shields, the best training in the galaxy." Kexera's laugh was bitter and hollow. "The Kithra don't fight wars the way we understand them. They don't want territory or resources. They want biomass. They literally ate our fleets, ships and all." The chamber erupted in panicked voices. Some council members demanded immediate evacuation of the core worlds. Others called for surrender negotiations. A few brave souls suggested a final defensive stand at the capital system. Intelligence Chief Velterra had remained silent throughout the chaos, her 6 eyes focused on a classified data pad. Finally, she stood up, and something in her posture made the entire chamber fall quiet. "There might be one option," she said, her voice so low that the translation systems had to amplify it. "But you're not going to like it." "Speak," Elder Mordan commanded. Velterra took a deep breath. "The humans." The reaction was immediate. Half the council gasped in shock. The other half laughed nervously. Humans were barely more than myths to most Federation citizens. Wild stories told by drunk traders in frontier bars. Tales of a species so violent and unpredictable that even the galaxy's worst pirates gave them a wide berth. "You can't be serious," Counselor Dexani said. "Humans are savages. Barbarians who solve every problem with explosions." "Exactly," Velterra replied grimly. "And right now, we need barbarians." She activated her data pad, projecting classified intelligence reports into the air above the council floor. 3 years ago, the Mordak Empire tried to enslave a human colony ship. The humans didn't just fight back. They tracked down every Mordak fleet, every supply depot, every military installation. The Mordak Empire doesn't exist anymore. "That's just a story," another counselor protested. 2 years ago, the hegemony of Krixtal decided to test human resolve by attacking their mining stations. The humans responded by glassing every Krixtal military world from orbit. The survivors are still rebuilding. The chamber was dead silent now. Last year, pirates captured a human merchant vessel carrying refugees. "Do you know what the humans did?" Velterra's voice grew cold. "They didn't negotiate. They didn't pay ransom. They sent a single ship that hunted down every pirate clan involved. Every single one." Elder Mordan felt ancient fear creeping up his spine. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "The humans have a saying," Velterra continued. "Don't start fights you can't finish. But they have another saying too, if someone threatens innocence, finish them permanently." The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Some council members argued that asking humans for help was like inviting demons to save you from wolves. Others pointed out that wolves were currently eating their children while they debated philosophy. Finally, Elder Mordan called for silence. The Federation has always prided itself on civilization. On solving conflicts through diplomacy and peaceful means. But our children are being devoured while we speak. His ancient voice grew hard as steel. "Send the message." The transmission was crafted carefully. No demands. No arrogance. Just a simple plea from one intelligent species to another. Federation under attack. Genocide imminent. Need immediate assistance. Coordinates attached. Payment negotiable. They sent it into the void and waited. 3 days passed like 3 years. Every hour brought fresh reports of Kythera advances. Entire star systems going dark. Refugee fleets fleeing toward the core worlds with stories of planets stripped down to bare rock. Then, just as hope began to die, the communications array lit up with an incoming message. The voice that answered was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its casual confidence. Message received. En route. ETA, 72 hours. Admiral Jake Morrison, Terran Expeditionary Force. That was it. No questions about payment. No demands for strategic information. No negotiations about terms of engagement. Just a simple acknowledgement and a promise. Elder Mordan stared at the communication screen long after the message ended. Somewhere out in the darkness, humans were coming. Whether that was salvation or damnation remained to be seen. The Federation had called for backup. Soon, they would learn what that word meant to humanity. Ambassador Kexera stood in the Federation's primary sensor control room, his 4 eyes fixed on the long-range detection screens. For 72 hours, he had barely slept, waiting for some sign of the human response. He expected maybe a handful of ships. Perhaps a small mercenary group looking to make quick money from desperate aliens. The sensor technician, a young Zalani named Pexoro, suddenly sat bolt upright at his console. "Sir, we're getting hyperspace signatures on the outer rim." Kexera felt his heart skip a beat. "How many ships?" Pexoro's face went pale as his screen filled with contacts. I'm not sure, sir. The computer is still counting." "Still counting?" Kexera rushed to the console, staring at the display in growing disbelief. Red dots kept appearing on the screen, each one representing a massive energy signature dropping out of hyperspace. 5 ships. 10 ships. 20 ships. The numbers kept climbing. 50 vessels and still detecting more arrivals, Pexoro whispered, his voice shaking. Kexera felt his translator implant struggling to process what he was seeing. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of sensor malfunction. No species sent this kind of force to help strangers. 100 ships, sir. Still counting. That's impossible, Kexera muttered, but his eyes couldn't deny what the sensors were showing. The human fleet was enormous. Battlecruisers the size of city blocks. Aircraft carriers that could house entire squadrons. Destroyers bristling with weapon systems he couldn't even identify. "Final count, sir." Pexoro's voice was barely audible. 347 vessels. "And sir, some of them are so big our computers can't classify what they are." Kexera's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a nearby chair. The Federation had asked for backup, and the humans had sent an invasion force. What had they done? The communication panel suddenly crackled to life, and the main screen filled with the face of a human male. Kexera had never seen a human before, but the stories hadn't prepared him for this. The man's face was a map of old battles, with a jagged scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and calculating. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from commanding others in life-or-death situations. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran naval ship Retribution. We received your distress call. I need complete tactical data on the Kythera swarm transmitted to my fleet immediately. Ship counts, weapon capabilities, movement patterns, everything you have." Kexera struggled to find his voice. "Admiral Morrison, we are grateful for your response, truly we are, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We cannot possibly afford to pay for such a massive military deployment. The Federation's entire defense budget couldn't cover even a fraction of this force." Morrison's expression didn't change. Not even a flicker of emotion crossed his scarred features. "Ambassador, who said anything about payment?" But surely a fleet this size costs. You called for help against genocidal insects, Morrison interrupted, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. We brought everything we had in the sector. Behind Morrison, another figure moved into view. A woman with short black hair and the kind of posture that screamed military training. Sir, Captain Lisa Rodriguez reporting. The 8th Marine Division is loaded and ready for immediate deployment. Colonel Davis wants to know if you want the heavy assault mechs prepped as well. Affirmative, Morrison replied without taking his eyes off Kexera. Tell Davis to prep everything. I want options on the table. Kexera felt his world spinning. Admiral, I don't understand. Why would you bring such overwhelming force for strangers? For the first time, something that might have been a smile flickered across Morrison's face, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Ambassador, let me explain something about humans. When someone calls us for backup, we don't send backup. We send a solution. A permanent one. Rodriguez leaned closer to the camera. Sir, the fleet commanders are asking about rules of engagement. Standard protocol for genocide scenarios, Morrison replied. No prisoners from command species. No negotiations. Complete elimination of threat capability. Kexera's translator was working overtime trying to process the casual way these humans discussed what sounded like total warfare. Admiral, surely there must be some way to resolve this through diplomacy. Ambassador, Morrison's voice cut through his words like a blade. The Kithra made their choice when they decided to eat entire civilizations. We're just here to make sure they understand the consequences of that choice. The screen behind Morrison lit up with tactical displays showing the approaching Kithra forces. Thousands of insectoid ships moving in perfect formation toward the Federation's core worlds. Now, Morrison continued, his storm-gray eyes boring into Kexera through the screen, you can either give us that tactical data, or we can figure out the Kithra's capabilities by shooting at them. Your choice, but I recommend the first option. It'll be cleaner for everyone involved. Kexera looked around the sensor room at his fellow Zilani, all of them staring at the screens in shock. They had asked for help, and help had come. But this wasn't the kind of help the Federation had ever imagined. This was help with teeth, claws, and enough firepower to crack planets. Transmitting all data now, Admiral, Kexera said quietly. Good, Morrison nodded. Now sit back and let us work. You wanted the Kithra problem solved. It's about to be solved permanently. The screen went dark, leaving the Federation observers alone with the terrifying realization that they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. Captain Mike Thompson stood on the bridge of the TNS Vengeance, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the three-dimensional battle display floating in front of him. Red dots represented the Kithra swarm, moving in their typical mob formation like a plague of locusts. Blue dots showed his human fleet, already spreading out in patterns that would have confused any civilized military strategist. Commander Davis, Thompson said calmly, never taking his eyes off the display. Signal all squadron leaders. We're going with pattern Delta 7. Commander Davis, a veteran of 12 major battles, paused at his console. Sir, that's a deep penetration assault. We'll be sending small groups directly into the heart of their formation. Casualties will be acceptable, Thompson finished, his voice as cold as deep space. The Kithra chose to commit genocide against innocent civilians. We're just returning the favor, with compound interest. Across the Federation's monitoring stations, Zilani observers watched in growing horror as the human fleet began to move. Instead of forming the traditional defensive walls that every civilized species used in space combat, the humans were doing something that looked completely insane. They were splitting up. What are they doing? Ambassador Kexera demanded, staring at his tactical screen. They're breaking formation. They're making themselves vulnerable. Intelligence Chief Velterra, who had studied human tactics for years, felt her blood run cold. No, she whispered. They're not making themselves vulnerable. They're turning themselves into weapons. On the display, the human fleet divided into dozens of smaller groups, each one racing toward different sections of the Kithra formation. What should have been a coordinated defense had become something that looked like organized chaos. The first human squadron hit the outer edge of the Kithra swarm like a hammer striking glass. But instead of engaging in traditional combat, they did something unprecedented. They flew directly into the enemy formation, guns blazing, gathering tactical data even as they fought for their lives. Aggressive reconnaissance, Commander Davis explained to his bewildered bridge crew. We deliberately fly into the enemy formation to learn their capabilities while shooting everything that moves. It's dangerous, but it gives us information no other species bothers to collect. The Kithra, used to facing enemies who fought defensively, suddenly found themselves dealing with opponents who seemed to have no sense of self-preservation. Human ships would dive straight into swarms of enemy fighters, absorbing damage while systematically destroying anything they could target. Phoenix Squadron reporting, crackled a voice over the comm, we've penetrated their defensive screen. These bugs don't adapt well to close-range combat. Recommend all units switch to knife-fighting range. Thompson smiled grimly. You heard the man. All ships, close to point-blank range. Let's show these insects what humans do when someone threatens our friends. Meanwhile, deep inside a Kithra hive ship, Colonel Amy Wilson and her Marines were writing their own chapter in the art of human warfare. Unlike other species who might try to capture enemy vessels for study, the humans had a much simpler approach. Listen up, Marines, Wilson's voice echoed through the transport ship as it approached the massive insectoid vessel. We're not here for prisoners. We're not here for intelligence gathering. We're here to make sure this particular ship never threatens anyone ever again. The Marine assault was unlike anything the Federation had ever witnessed. Instead of trying to capture key sections of the enemy ship, the humans moved through the corridors like a force of nature, systematically planting explosive charges throughout the vessel's vital systems. Plant the charges and get out, Wilson commanded over the comm as her team spread through the hive ship. We're not here to capture anything. We're here to make sure nothing survives to breed. The Kithra defenders, evolved for overwhelming less advanced species through sheer numbers, found themselves facing an enemy that actually became more dangerous when outnumbered. When human Marines encountered large groups of insects, they didn't retreat or call for backup. They smiled. Contact front, reported Sergeant Blake Williams from deep inside the hive ship. Looks like about 50 bugs between us and the reactor core. Copy that, Sergeant, Wilson replied. Standard doctrine applies. Show them why humans don't negotiate with genocidal insects. What followed was a masterclass in human military thinking. Where other species saw impossible odds, humans saw target-rich environments. The Marines moved through the hive ship not like invaders trying to survive, but like exterminators doing a job they had done 1,000 times before. Back in space, the Kithra were learning a harsh lesson about human military doctrine. Every time they managed to drive off a human attack group, 2 more would appear from different angles. When they focused their forces on one threat, 3 more would emerge from their blind spots. The insects had evolved to fight creatures that valued their own lives. They had no experience fighting a species that would deliberately sacrifice tactical advantages to achieve strategic victories. Admiral Morrison, reported Captain Rodriguez from her flagship. The Kithra are starting to pull back. They're trying to regroup. Morrison's voice came back over the comm with deadly calm. Negative on allowing regrouping. All units pursue. When something runs from you in space, you chase it down and make sure it never runs from anyone else again. The Federation observers watched in stunned silence as human ships that should have been retreating to repair damage instead regrouped, adapted their tactics, and returned with reinforcements. It was as if defeat only made them more determined to win. They don't fight like any civilized species, Kexera murmured, watching the battle unfold. Velterra nodded grimly. That's exactly why we called them. The bridge of the TNS Retribution hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Morrison studied the holographic battle display. For the first time in over 3,000 years of galactic expansion, the Kithra swarm was doing something their species had never done before. They were running away. "Sir," reported Commander Johnson from the tactical station, "we're detecting massive hyperspace signatures. The surviving Kithra vessels are attempting to flee the system." Morrison's scarred face showed no emotion as he watched red dots disappearing from the display one by one. Around him, his senior staff moved with the practiced coordination of predators who had done this dance many times before. "General Roberts," Morrison called to a grizzled officer studying pursuit vectors. "I want tracking beacons on every single fleeing vessel. Not one of those ships leaves this sector without us knowing exactly where it's going." Roberts nodded grimly. "Already on it, sir. Stealth frigates are deploying hunter-killer teams as we speak. These bugs won't be able to hide anywhere in known space." "Major Anderson," Morrison continued, turning to a woman with cold blue eyes, "coordinate with naval intelligence. I want their entire supply network mapped and marked for destruction. Every breeding world, every supply depot, every staging area they've ever used." The Zolani delegation stood in a corner of the bridge, watching this display of systematic planning with growing unease. Ambassador Kexera had seen military briefings before, but nothing like this. The humans weren't just winning a battle. They were planning the complete elimination of an entire species. "Admiral," Elder Mordan ventured quietly, "surely now that the immediate threat has passed, there might be room for negotiation." Morrison turned those storm-gray eyes on the Elder, and for a moment, the temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. "Negotiation, Elder? With creatures that just spent 3 weeks eating 12 billion of your people alive?" Before Mordan could respond, the communication array lit up with an incoming transmission. The bridge filled with a complex mixture of chemical signatures and electromagnetic pulses that the ship's computers identified as Kithra communication protocols. "It's the Queen Mind," reported the communications officer. "She's broadcasting on all frequencies. Some kind of chemical negotiation signal." Captain Rodriguez, who had been studying the alien transmission, looked up from her console. "Admiral, I'm reading surrender pheromones mixed with territorial negotiation markers. They want to talk terms." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Morrison stared at the communication display for a long moment, then turned to Rodriguez with an expression that would have frozen solar plasma. "Captain, please translate our response into their biochemical language. Make sure the message is very clear." Rodriguez's fingers moved across her console, converting human words into the complex chemical signals the Kithra used for communication. "What's the message, sir?" Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Genocide is not negotiable. Extinction is your only option." The chemical translation that went out over the comm array was unlike anything the Kithra had ever received. Where they expected territorial bargaining or resource negotiations, they got something their species had no concept for: implacable justice delivered with scientific precision. Ambassador Kexera leaned closer to Elder Mordan, his voice barely a whisper. "They're requesting terms. The Kithra are actually trying to surrender." Morrison's enhanced hearing caught the quiet conversation. He turned toward the Zolani delegation, and his scarred face showed something that might have been discussed. "Ambassador, let me explain something about human military doctrine. The Kithra had terms. They had terms when they chose to devour entire civilizations instead of finding empty worlds to colonize. They had terms when they decided that other species existed only to feed their endless hunger." His voice grew colder with each word. "Now they get to learn why humans don't negotiate with genocidal insects." On the tactical display, the fleeing Kithra vessels were scattering in all directions like seeds blown from a dying flower. But instead of finding safety in dispersal, they were about to learn another hard lesson about human military thinking. "Pursuit Groups Alpha through Zulu are reporting ready for long-range tracking operations," announced Commander Johnson. "Execute," Morrison ordered simply. What followed was unlike anything the Federation had ever witnessed. Human ships, instead of celebrating their victory and returning home, began a methodical hunt that spanned multiple star systems. Every fleeing Kithra vessel found itself shadowed by human pursuers who seemed to have unlimited patience and inexhaustible resources. "Sir," reported Major Anderson, Intelligence Division has identified 17 Kithra breeding colonies in the Outer Rim. All located far from any inhabited systems. "Send the coordinates to Battle Group 7, Morrison replied without hesitation. "I want those colonies glassed from orbit. No survivors, no exceptions." Elder Mordan stepped forward, his ancient voice trembling. "Admiral, surely you don't mean to destroy their entire species? Even the non-combatants?" Morrison turned to face the Elder directly. "Elder, the Kithra don't have non-combatants. Every single member of their species participated in genocide. The workers who processed the biomass from your people. The breeders who produced more soldiers to continue the slaughter. The queens who directed the consumption of entire worlds." Captain Rodriguez looked up from her tactical analysis. "Sir, we're tracking over 2,000 individual Kithra vessels across 47 different star systems. This is going to require a long-term commitment." "Then we make a long-term commitment," Morrison replied matter-of-factly. "We track them all down. Every single ship, every hidden base, every last refuge they try to hide in. And we make sure they never threaten anyone ever again." The Kithra swarm, which had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, was learning what it meant to be hunted by a species that viewed the protection of innocent life as a sacred duty. They had expected to face another prey species that would eventually tire of fighting and accept coexistence. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined, humans who had decided that some threats to galactic peace needed to be eliminated permanently. The hunt had begun, and it would not end until every last Kithra ship was nothing but drifting debris in the cold darkness of space. 3 months had passed since the first human ships dropped out of hyperspace above the Federation's capital world. 3 months of systematic hunting that had turned the galaxy's most feared predators into scattered refugees hiding in the darkest corners of space. Now, Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the TNS Retribution, watching the final preparations for departure. The Kithra swarm, once numbering in the tens of thousands of ships, had been reduced to less than 100 scattered vessels. Those few survivors were now hiding in the galactic rim, too terrified to venture anywhere near civilized space. Their expansion, which had continued unchecked for over 3 millennia, had been permanently crippled in less than 100 days. "Sir," reported Commander Johnson, approaching with a final status update, "all pursuit teams are reporting mission complete. The last confirmed Kithra breeding colony was eliminated 2 days ago. Intelligence estimates their remaining population at less than 1% of original numbers." Morrison nodded slowly. "Any signs of regrouping attempts?" "Negative, sir. They're scattered across 40 different systems, and our monitoring stations indicate they're too busy running to coordinate any kind of response. The few intercepted communications we've decoded suggest they've developed a new concept in their language." "Which is?" Johnson's expression was grim. "Fear, sir. They've learned to be afraid." Down in the Federation's council chambers, Elder Mordan was preparing for what he considered the most important diplomatic meeting of his long life. The humans were leaving, and the Federation needed to properly compensate them for services that had literally saved their entire civilization. "Are you certain about the terms?" he asked his aide, reviewing the data tablets one final time. "Mining rights to the Cygnus sector, territorial claims in the Outer Rim, preferential trade status for the next 50 years. Everything the Council approved, Elder. It's the least we can offer for what they've done." Mordan gathered his delegation and made his way to the docking bay where Admiral Morrison had agreed to meet them. The human leader stood waiting with a small group of his officers, their uniforms showing the wear of 3 months of continuous military operations. "Admiral Morrison," Mordan began formally, "on behalf of the Zalani Federation and all member species, we offer you our deepest gratitude. Please, name your price for this service." He gestured to his aides, who stepped forward with the data tablets containing the Federation's generous offers. Territory, mining rights, trade agreements, technological exchanges. Whatever humanity requires, we are prepared to provide. Morrison looked at the offered tablets but made no move to take them. Instead, he shook his head slowly. Keep your resources, Elder. Your people need them more than we do. But surely there must be something, Kexera interjected, still struggling to understand these strange humans. The fuel costs alone for a fleet this size must be astronomical. The ammunition expenditure, the repair costs, the lost time from your own territory. Morrison's scarred face showed something that might have been amusement. Ambassador, do you know what humans value most? Profit? Kexera guessed uncertainly. Territory expansion. Natural resources. Safety, Morrison replied simply. The safety of innocent people going about their daily lives without fear. Your people building homes, raising children, creating art, exploring the universe. That's what we came here to protect. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Baker, Morrison's longtime aide, stepped forward. The colonel was younger than his admiral but carried the same quiet authority that marked veteran human soldiers. Elder, Baker said, humans learned something important during our own development. Bullies don't stop being bullies just because you ask them nicely. They stop when someone makes them stop. And if you don't stop them early, they just get stronger and hurt more innocent people. We learned that lesson the hard way on Earth, Morrison added, his voice carrying old pain. Cost us nearly 1 billion lives before we figured out that some threats can't be negotiated with. They can only be eliminated. The Federation delegation stood in stunned silence as they processed this information. These humans had traveled across the galaxy, risked their lives, and spent enormous resources not for profit or territory, but for an abstract concept like justice. But why us? Elder Mordan asked quietly. Why risk so much for strangers you'd never met? Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars visible through the docking bay's transparent aluminum windows. Because if we don't protect the peaceful species, who will? The galaxy has room for every civilization that wants to build something beautiful. What it doesn't have room for are those who think strength gives them the right to destroy others. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Morrison turned back to the Federation representatives one final time. Elder, I want you to remember something. Somewhere out there in the dark, there are other species like the Kithra. Predators who see peaceful civilizations as nothing more than prey. When they come, and they will come eventually, remember that the galaxy's peaceful species have friends. Friends who take the protection of innocent life very seriously. The human fleet began its departure sequence just as the Federation's primary sun was setting behind the capital city. One by one, the massive warships engaged their hyperspace drives and vanished into the void, leaving behind only empty space and the lingering promise of protection. In the months and years that followed, something remarkable happened throughout the galaxy. Species that had been building fleets for conquest suddenly found peaceful exploration more appealing. Aggressive civilizations that had been eyeing their neighbors' resources decided that empty systems were just as valuable. Pirates who had terrorized trade routes mysteriously developed respect for merchant vessels. The reason was always the same. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humans were watching. And the galaxy had learned that some sleeping giants were better left undisturbed. The Federation built monuments to commemorate their salvation, but the humans never returned to see them. They were busy elsewhere, answering other distress calls from other desperate civilizations. Because in a galaxy full of predators and prey, someone had to stand guard over the innocent. And humanity had volunteered for permanent duty.